Welcome, everyone. My name is Bridget Cabrera, she, her, hers, and I'm the Executive Director of Methodist Federation for Social Action. MFSA is an over 100-year-old justice-seeking, faith-based policy and organizing network. And our mission is to mobilize, lead, and sustain a justice-seeking United Methodist movement, energizing people to be agents of God's justice, peace, and reconciliation. I'm very excited to welcome you to this presentation of the MFSA Organizational Racial Audit. As we get started, I want us to take a moment for us to acknowledge this land and the many lands that we are all joining this call from. Its history and all the being seen and unseen, known and unknown. And as we step into our work on these many lands, most of us as uninvited guests, we offer this work in the spirit of reparation, devoting ourselves to justice as we strive to uplift the legacy of this place and these many places. And then we invite you to acknowledge the Indigenous land of where you are joining from and to type that in the chat. A few announcements concerning our call today. By participating in our webinars, we covenant together to co-create an equitable and brave space where we learn, we engage, and we grow in relationship together. We are recording this webinar, and that recording will be shared up on our website and YouTube channel, and you'll also be able to share that with others as well. And as you have questions anytime during our conversation today, we invite you to type them in the chat. You don't have to wait till we get to the Q&A section. You can type them in at any time so you don't forget. So please feel free to do that. And we also are offering closed captioning. It's automatically generated, so do expect to see spelling errors and other errors. Now, as many of you know, MFSA has been working on an organizational racial audit for the last 3 years, and we are very excited to share the final racial audit report with all of you, our justice-seeking movement. And we're doing this for 2 reasons. One, we want to be accountable to you. And 2, we hope that you will join us in this work. This work and its findings are a confession and a commitment to what and who we want to become. And this is only the beginning of this journey, as you'll see in the full report. And I'll invite Pat to go ahead and start us off.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Pat Stewart, and I'm one of the actual co-conveners of the racial audit. And I've had the privilege of working with 2 wonderful people, Karen Nelson and Sean McRoberts, for the last 3 years. We began this journey believing this was going to be a very short time period, but it lasted for 3 years. When we started doing this audit, we we were given 3 evaluation tools that were provided by Crossroads Anti-Racism Organizing and Training. And those tools allowed us to look for common themes and patterns from internal to external. The first tool is called the Power Matrix. And this tool allows us to take a deep look at the reality of what MFSA is and how it functions, and specifically how power is distributed throughout the organization. And we were able to identify and articulate ways that we have been socially conditioned to maintain and perpetuate systemic racism within our culture. The Power Matrix was a good eye-opener for us because while many of us thought we knew how things worked, we learned how things worked with much more detail and much more clarity. The second tool was called the Continuum on Becoming an Anti-Racist Multicultural Institution. And this continuum allowed us to look at vertical and horizontal analysis of MFSA. And we identified which stages we were at throughout our institutional functions and purposes. The racial audit team also asked the board to respond to 6 categories on the continuum. And this tool helped us begin to look externally at our organization and also internally to see where we believe things were working well or not working well. The third tool was a survey, and the survey was developed with all of our team members coming up with questions that we thought would give us vital answers to what was going on within the organization. And the survey reached out to diverse people familiar with MFSA, but perhaps not members of MFSA. We work with many organizations, and we wanted to get the perception of groups that collaborate with us on many of our issues. And those were our tools that we used. I believe that part, my section is complete except for one vital thing. The picture that you're seeing is all the people who from the very beginning, 3 years ago, agreed to meet once a week to get this done in a year. As I said, it took longer than a year, but these were people of many diverse opinions and many diverse geographical areas, but with wonderful ideas that helped us really hone in on what was important, what could be changed, and what we could do in the future to make MFSA a better organization. So I say thank you to each of these people, because everyone contributed and everyone did the part that we asked them to do. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Reverend Karen. I'm a retired elder in the Oregon, Idaho Annual Conference, and I serve on the MFSA board as the secretary, and I've also been part of the racial audit team for the past 3 years. As Pat said, it was a much longer process than we thought it was going to be, and we are excited to be able to share with you the results so that we can look at what are the next steps moving forward. When we first started working with the tools that Pat described, we came up with 8 themes, and as we looked at those 8 themes and prepared to create a survey, we realized that we could bring them down to 6. And so what I want to share with you this evening are the 6 themes that we used in our survey and then used for the rest of our work. Theme 1, MFSA prioritizes white comfort, focusing on white saviorism and being the good white ones. This behavior results in performative allyship, commodifies and renders people of color invisible. Now, as I'm going through these themes, I'm going to spend a lot of time explaining them at this point. So if you have some questions, be sure you put those in the chat and we'll pick them up when we get to our question and answer time. The other thing I want to mention about our themes is that there are some terms and things that we've used in them. And when you go to the website and click on the executive summary or the report, some of those terms will be highlighted, and you'll be able to take them and click on them and find another document that gives a definition of how we made use of those particular terms. Let's take a look at theme 2. Theme 2 is MFSA functions as an organization of and for white progressives, prioritizing white power and control, which results in a lack of investment in and abdication of responsibility to be accountable to people of color communities. The Third theme, MFSA deflects responsibility by comparing itself to the United Methodist Church, which leads to complacency at times and at other times righteousness. These attitudes insulate MFSA from the critical self-assessment that would lead to the deconstruction of white dominance. And the fourth theme, MFSA's organizational structure and cultural norms are white-centered, which prevents it from recognizing and confronting racism. These structures and norms also cause MFSA to burden and undermine people of color leaders. And the fifth theme, MFSA's scarcity mindset draws attention away from advocacy for racial justice and toward practical measures that center organizational preservation and limit its sense of what is possible. And the sixth theme, MFSA members tend to operate out of self-righteousness, which results in feeling good about themselves without needing to change, take action, and or be in an accountable relationship with people of color and people of color communities. As we worked with these themes, this wasn't easy work. There are things here that we didn't particularly want to hear or learn about ourselves. And so we took these themes and created some recommendations for the work going forward to make our whole institution, our whole organization, less racist and more open to everyone. So I'm going to turn this over to Sean, who's going to talk about our recommendations for moving forward.
Thank you, Karen. I just want to acknowledge the weight of those themes and give a moment for folks to take a breath, to maybe jot a note to yourself or put a question in the chat. After we share with you the recommendations from the audit team, we will have a time for question and answer. So we'll get to those questions that you're putting in the chat. So the recommendations that the audit team brought as a result of our study, and these recommendations that have been accepted by the board and program council of the Methodist Federation for Social Action. These recommendations are not a checklist to be checked off and forgotten, but they signal a transformational shift in MFSA's way of being. The report, as you've heard already, is not a conclusion of MFSA's transformation. Not the end, but the beginning, really. This is a roadmap to move us toward transformation. While our audit was focused on white supremacy and racism, we recognize that systems don't exist in a vacuum, and so we're also working to dismantle cis-heteropatriarchy, colonialism, ableism, and all systems of oppression. Our commitment is an intersectional commitment. All of these recommendations that we've found are rooted in a commitment that this racial audit work will move MFSA toward the work of dismantling white supremacy within the organization. And as we carry out this internal work, we will be better suited to continue to confront white supremacy in the wider denomination and world with greater integrity and effectiveness. We know that this is an imperfect roadmap, so we anticipate continued revision and growth, but have also included timeframes to allow for flexibility to change the culture of MFSA at its root. And if you go to the website once again and find the executive summary or full report, you'll find in that as well a timeline resource that shows the way we anticipate these actions being carried out. So we found that the recommendations we're able to make somewhat rely upon one another. They're not a checklist, but they need to be carried forward in concert to address a holistic culture change in MFSA. So that's why you see this lovely graphic that shows interlocking recommendations centered on a new relational organizing model and education that build out into changes in governance, relationships, and programming. If we move on to our first recommendation, it really addresses that relational organizing model. MFSA will create a racial audit implementation team that is a diverse group of board and program council members to help lead the work of implementing the audit recommendations. And this work really will be carried out in a couple of ways. If we move to the next slide, we'll see MFSA will immediately adopt and begin to develop an alternative relational organizing model that moves away from white male-dominated targets, the binary view of who is with us and who is against us, and transactional relationships, and toward authentic, accountable, and equitable relationships. And MFSA will achieve this by experimenting with the board and program council in regards to practices around meetings and consensus building and decision-making that are anti-racist, anti-colonial, and rooted in authentic, accountable, and equitable relationships. And the second part of this relational organizing model MFSA will develop a culture. Here we are. MFSA will develop a culture of self-evaluation and assessment, of feedback and accountability that is implemented throughout all areas of the organization. And MFSA will achieve this by developing and implementing specific practices of self and group evaluation, as well as giving and receiving feedback at various times throughout the year and throughout the organization's life. These practices will lean into curiosity and discomfort, understanding that we don't learn and grow if we only stay within our comfort zones, and knowing that the greatest and fastest growth occurs when we challenge ourselves. I'll pause here so we can all take a breath, maybe jot a note, drop a question in the chat. And move on to the second recommendation concerning education. MFSA will continue to educate ourselves on white supremacy, colonialism, cis-heteropatriarchy, and capitalism, and will find ways of practicing liberation and interrupting and dismantling these systems of oppression. We will do this by developing a critical, collective, intersectional systemic analysis, a lens that will help us to more readily recognize and interrupt patterns of white supremacy culture at all levels of the organization. We will engage with people in ways that build capacity and create shared language and introduce people to foundational concepts and frameworks of anti-racism, so that we can move toward having movement-wide and denominational-wide conversations that address the core issues of white supremacy and systemic racism, so we can make real systemic change. I'll invite you to take a breath, jot a note, drop a question in the chat. Moving on to the third recommendation, MFSA will cultivate reciprocal, supportive, and accountable relationships with people of color-led communities within the United Methodist Church and beyond. These relationships are the foundation for sustained, shared work for intersectional justice. MFSA will achieve this as leaders intentionally connect with, educate themselves on, and actively support the work of racial and ethnic caucuses at the annual conference level and national level. MFSA will also establish and deepen relationships with people of color-led organizations beyond the United Methodist Church. MFSA will bear the weight of this relationship building, seeking to minimize the additional work for people of color-led organizations. Again, take a breath, jot a note, or put your questions in the chat. The fourth recommendation relates to programming. In our programming, MFSA will increase investment in reciprocal, supportive, and accountable partnerships with organizations of and for people of color. The relationships and understanding that are generated in this work will strengthen legislative advocacy in its season. And MFSA will do this by moving away from white saviorism and toward reciprocal, supportive, and accountable partnerships. MFSA will seek opportunities to collaborate in program creation and in legislation. MFSA will actively support the programs and legislation of our partner organizations. Just one more recommendation. So this is a good time to jot that note or drop a question in the chat. So the final recommendation is related to governance. MFSA will reform the organizational structure and cultural norms of the organization so that it will support people of color leaders and recognize, confront, and interrupt white supremacy and racism. MFSA will do this through increasing intentionality in both its recruitment and its onboarding, with a specific focus on the experiences of people of color and commitments to anti-racism. MFSA will revise organizational documents to interrupt and dismantle white supremacy. And I note again that there's elaboration on these recommendations on the website. You can read the full report. It's just about 36 pages that has some detailed action steps and an anticipated sequence of how these recommendations will be lived out by the implementation team and partners. So once again, this is a good time to drop your questions in the chat, make a note for something you'd like to follow up on. Thanks to everybody who's already been putting those questions in there. I think I'll welcome my co-conveners, Pat and Karen, back, and we'll start taking up your questions here. One question that came in was around terminology, and I want to thank Pat for highlighting through the report. You'll see hyperlinked terms because there's words we tried to make things as clear as possible, but there was some specific language we needed to use because it carries real weight in the work that we're doing. And so the framework for a shared understanding has already begun in trying to clarify the way we're using some of this terminology. So the first question is kind of related to that. Somebody just wanted to know about commodification. Can we please explain commodification? Did you want to jump in on that, Pat? Oh, you're muted there.
Thank you for your patience. As we were developing this report, there are very specific terms that we used that I didn't understand. And so I had to go and find out what they meant. But commodification basically is the action or process of treating something as a mere commodity. And I know that sounds like it's a backwards thing, but it's sort of like, instead of it makes relationships transactional. That means if you give me something, I give you something. And so but we're not in a true relationship because I don't know what you want and you don't know what I want. But commodification just means I need something from you, you need something from me, without understanding exactly what either of us would use that item for. Is that a good definition?
Thank you, Pat. I find that real helpful. And I saw a note that that term is not yet in the framework. So I might just note that we'll highlight that framework is a growing document that will help us to have a conversation together as the MFSA movement. So a second question here, how are you working with communities of color for input or reporting results of the audit, recommendations, and utilizing communities of color's voice in this work? So how are we working with communities of color for input or reporting or recommendations, or are we utilizing communities of color voice in this work?
I think there's several things that we've been doing. I know that Bridget and Pat did interviews prior to our survey. We also did. We also met with some of the from the ethnic caucuses of the United Methodist Church as we were preparing the survey. I know we did for sure as we were finishing. As we prepared our executive summary, we took that to them and said, okay, what do you see here? What do you hear? Give us some feedback before we even took it to our MFSA board and program council folks. Before we finished writing it, we wanted their input on it. So we've begun some conversations about how we can be in partnership with one another. And we have a long ways to go. We're at the beginning steps.
As Karen said, we started the process by asking the organizations with people of color that we collaborate with what they thought. And we have taken their thoughts and incorporated them into this report. We decided that once we start this whole process of looking at MFSA and anti-racism, it is most important, that we go back to them and tell them what we've done and get more reflection from them of how we can move forward. Because this was not like, we're gonna ask you one time and this is what, we're gonna go forward with. We want to keep it collaborative. We want to make sure that people feel they have the right and the ability to give us feedback on some of the stuff we've done.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Karen. A third question here. What do you conceive the timetable for focusing primarily on internal structures and processes before balancing the focus with outside anti-racist tasks and collaborations? And I might just take this one and refer to that timetable that I mentioned. You'll find that at the beginning of the recommendations section in the executive summary. I might also note that you can see the full text of the executive summary and the complete report on that website. Once again, at mfsaweb.org, racial audit report. But Pat or Karen, did you want to add about kind of that movement from internal structure and processes to outside anti-racism engagement?
I think, one of the pieces there's that we're flying the plane while we're repairing it. And so we need to do some of that internal work, but we also need to keep doing the external work as well. So it's not an either or kind of thing. It's how do we fit all those little pieces together? And sometimes one is going to be more the focus and sometimes the other. Yes, we know we have some educational work to do before we can really implement some of the outside things perhaps, but we're not going to just say, okay, we're taking a year off to do that. Just as we didn't take time off while we were working on the audit itself. Pat, I think you had something you were going to add to.
Well, I was going to say, we have a role and we have a mission as MFSA. And as we continue in our mission for social justice, we're going to, I totally agree with you, Karen, we're going to be doing both at the same time, because there will be issues we have to confront. And we are willing to go forth and confront them, knowing as we're doing it, we are morphing into an organization that can be a better representation of social justice.
So here's a process question from the way we carried out the audit. What was the vehicle for your survey? What questions did you ask? What languages were provided?
This is a good question. When we developed the survey, we, of course, developed it in English. I hope I'm understanding it the correct way. And then we identified people we wanted to respond to it, and we sent it out. I am not sure. This is confessional. I didn't get a chance to fill out the survey. But so I don't know what languages it came in. Karen, do you know anything more about that?
I believe we sent it out in English, and I will say that when we got some feedback from some of the ethnic caucus groups, from some of that, we needed to consider those whose first language is not English, even as we were writing our report. And so that's been an awareness that's been in the back of our minds as we've done this work, that we put it in plain English, that's easy to understand, and that's been part of the goal behind the framework as well, so that those words that may not be comfortable or familiar to us, that we've given definitions of those, so that we're all looking at them in the same way. Even for some of us who speak English all the time. I would agree, Pat, that we probably didn't do as much as we might have. I don't think we put it into any other languages as we got it.
Yes, I believe you're correct, because believing we had a shorter time frame, if we did not consider that aspect of it. But probably as this report is made available to people, that will maybe one of our considerations for making sure that it is accessible to people.
So the survey questions are in the report, in the link to the tables that show the results. So if you really want to dig into it, have fun.
Yeah, you'll find just in seeking transparency, you'll find all of the questions and pivot tables of the responses at the end of the full report. There's a link there that you'll see, I believe, just after the recommendations. So looking back to the big picture for MFSA moving forward, we have a question. I noticed the intention to do this work intersectionally and in the framework of other forms of oppression. And I know as white folks have the opportunity to shift to any conversation other than race, we will go there. So how will MFSA keep the priority on anti-racism? As we move forward, how are we going to maintain this priority?
One of the ways that we're going to continually focus on anti-racism is because we are going to be, what I'll talk about later is we're going to be forming an implementation team that will make sure that any action we take going forward leads us down that road. We want to make sure that even though there are other issues that can be distracting in some ways, that we always stay focused on what we intended to do from the very beginning.
You'll also see in the full report some notes on our measures for accountability. The implementation team will have of course, time and engagement in program council and board of directors meetings, and we'll be working to engage outside groups and process observers who will be able to let us know as whether we're making progress according to these commitments that we're sharing here today.
And one of the things that we tried to build into the recommendations was to be really clear that MFSA is an organization not just with a national board and a national focus, but that there are also many chapters in our annual conferences or regional offices, and that that as the program council, which is representatives from those chapters, gathers together, that we will be doing some of that educational work and some of that training, and then asking people to take that back to their chapters so that this work spreads out throughout the whole organization. And that then part of that conversation will be, leave that, what did you do with it?
So there's a couple questions that relate to specific groups and partners in our organization. One is just some background on MFSA. Could we provide a description of the origins, membership, and composition of MFSA, and what other organizations that MFSA partners with? And I think I'd refer you especially to the website, mfsaweb.org, with mfsaweb.org/our-history and mfsaweb.org/partners-in-justice. Thank you, Bridget. I think you're putting those in the chat. But another kind of specific question about this, what specific work have you done to support Native American ministry and specific support for land sovereignty and American Indian persons who wish to pursue Christian leadership? And I want to acknowledge too, this is more a broad question about MFSA rather than the
Mhm.
report in particular. I wasn't on leadership in MFSA before joining the report team, but perhaps Karen and Pat, you have some insights here, or at least know where we might look to learn those things.
I guess one of the things I would say is that for at least the last year, as we have done webinars and things, that we have been very intentional about the land acknowledgement and inviting others to put their own land acknowledgement in the chat to raise awareness of those things. I am trying to remember. We did a series of webinars on doctrine of discovery, and over the past year and a half or so. So I don't know that I can tell you each thing that we have done, but there has been some work done, and certainly will continue to do that work and to continue to build on what we've been doing.
And the Doctrine of Discovery webinars are one example of what we're talking about in terms of building, investing in partnerships and investing in partner organizations. We didn't take the lead on those, if I understand correctly, right? But came in as a supporting partner for Native American ministries leaders who were creating that. So we did our best to expand the awareness around that into our community and support with resources that we were able to bring to that project. And as we look forward toward investing in people of color organizations as organizational partners, I think we anticipate doing more of that work.
And sometimes the work that we do is providing the resource for the webinar, providing the Zoom and the registration and those pieces, while other groups are the ones who are providing the resource people and actually creating the programming of the webinar. We've done that also with UMKR, United Methodist for Archivalist Response, as they have done a number of webinars about the Holy Land in Palestine over the last couple of years.
We support other resources that have information that educate people about things they may not know about. And that is we have purposely partnered with different organizations, because whereas as a national organization, maybe we don't have specific skills or knowledge, but we know others that do, and we are willing to give them a way to educate people outside of their general area. And because MFSA specifically is all of the local people that are on this webinar and others. And so we want to make sure that we provide information that will be interesting and pinpoints of an issue that will be important to one of our members.
I noticed that Bridget put in the chat the Stealing the Earth webinars, which were the ones we did on the Doctrine of Discovery and with Native American
Yes.
presenters.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you both so much. We're coming to the close of our time designated for question and answer. We have not responded to all of the questions. So I would encourage you once again to head over to mfsaweb.org, check out both the website, the executive summary, the full report, which includes the survey and findings, as well as the timeline for carrying out this action. But also, if you have questions, if you are seeking additional follow-up, please feel free to email MFSA at mfsa@mfsaweb.org. And we'll be interested to hear from you going ahead. I think in terms of next steps, Pat is going to outline some of what that looks like.
When we began the racial audit team, our goal was to build a house in some ways. So we built the framework for a house of change, a house that is going to to implement a difference in what the organization has been in the past. I learned a great deal when I did learn about the history of MFSA, and I'm always very impressed with what has been done, but I know going forward, we can do more. So when we built the racial audit team built a framework of how we can go forward. We want to create a racial audit implementation team. And this team, going back to my metaphor, is building up the walls and putting in the siding and putting in the windows, because the team worked very hard to get us to the point we're at, and we are going to develop, the implementation team is going to take it forward. There will probably be 7 to 9 members. Some of those details are not set in stone yet, but I would like you to know that because the original report is like 70 pages and the summary, executive summary, is about 36 pages, we developed a website, and the website is, it's at mfsaweb.org/racial-audit-report. And on that website, you can find out, you can read the summary report, you can learn more about the original team members, you can read the implementations, and that website is not going to be static. It is going to be like a living document, because as we go through and implement things and make changes or present each of the themes in a deeper, more satisfying way, this is a site you can go to find out. This is not a report to be put on the shelf, but it's a report to be added to and increased and deepened and educate. Oh, one thing about the implementation team. When you go to that website, you will get a chance to sign up for our newsletter. And I know some of you already have the newsletter, which is great. But if you don't, please sign up for the newsletter, because the newsletter always has information. It has information about webinars. It has information about this process that we're going through. And it has information about some of the regional chapters and things that are going on. So please sign up for our newsletter. That's the first thing. Second, go to our website. And third, share the report that you find at our website with your local chapter members, because the more people know what we're doing, the more input we will get, and the more we will be able to change and grow and make this organization better. And if you're not a member, please join us, because there are things going on all around the country that deal with social justice that may spark your interest. And if they do, this is the organization for you, because there are many things that we can work on internally and externally.
Well, I want to express my gratitude to all of you for being here this evening, for sharing this time, for your commitment to justice and the work of anti-racism. I am confident that you will each carry it forward in your various spaces and ways. And so in closing, I'd like to share a couple of prayers. The first being, in fact, a radical gratitude spell from Adrienne Marie Brown. This has sat with me throughout much of this process, throughout working with the audit team, to whom I am very grateful. And Adrienne Marie Brown's work continues to inspire and uplift me. So I'd like to share it with you as well. This is a spell to cast upon meeting a stranger, comrade or friend, working for social and or environmental justice and liberation. You are a miracle walking. I greet you with wonder. In a world which seeks to own your joy and your imagination, you have chosen to be free. Every day, as a practice. I can never know the struggles you went through to get here, but I know you have swum upstream, and at times it has been lonely. I want you to know I honor the choices you have made in solitude, and I honor the work you have done to belong. I honor your commitment to that which is larger than yourself, and your journey to love the particular container of life that is you. You are enough. Your work is enough. You are needed. Your work is sacred. You are here, and I am grateful. And finally, this prayer, adapted from a prayer by Levon Baylor. For all we have gathered through our toil, we give you thanks, O God. For all that we have claimed at the expense of others, we beg your forgiveness. May we plant seeds, heal wounds, and nurture your world. May our witness to your gift of possibility help to make it real to those who can only look backwards. Help us to face the future, trusting you, as we seek the harmony of hand and heart. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Sean. And I want to say thank you to everyone who has participated tonight and listened and gathered information and sent out questions, because the important thing going forward is that we want to be able to move forward, and we want you to be able to know that we have ears open and minds open, and we are ready to make a change. So please, if you have any questions, when you get to the website and you want to contact anybody, let us know. And we're going to, and pay attention, please, because we're going to have things in the newsletter and on that website that will help our organization nationally and locally become more anti-racist. And I believe that, because otherwise I would not have devoted 3 years to making this report.
And Pat, I want to say thank you to the people that are going to walk forward with us in doing this work. It's going to take all of us to really change who we are and bring ourselves into a place where we can say everyone is equal and we value everyone.
Bridget, would you like to say anything?
I just want to thank the team again, and our co-conveners who have helped lead us through this time. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. And again, reiterate, I posted the link in the chat for, but that page on the website has all the information in terms of links to the audit. We'll be adding more information to there. So that's going to kind of be the hub to everything of the audit. And we'll be sharing updates when we put in place the implementation team. We will share that out. So as we're continuing this work, our goal is to do that in public, as transparent and as possible. And also we want to hear from you as well. So please email us, please, as we're continuing to do this work together. So thank you all for joining us, and we encourage you also to share this. We'll also add the recording to that as well, to share this with your church, with your district, with your conference. This work is very, very important work that we as a church all should be working together on. So thank you again.